what is this consciousness? This consciousness is I am. What is the meaning of this I am? This is referring to self-awareness. I am aware that I am doing a video recording right now. This computer is not aware that it is being used for video recording. It does not possess self-awareness. I do possess self-awareness. This is called consciousness. I'm conscious of others, and I'm also conscious of myself, and I'm conscious that I'm conscious. I'm aware. It is awareness. Then what am I? In contaminated consciousness, I am means I'm the Lord of all I survey. I'm the enjoyer. So when our consciousness is contaminated, then our awareness is mixed with the conception that we are meant to create and enjoy different configurations of matter. The world revolves because every living being thinks that he is the Lord and creator of the material world. Material consciousness has two psychic divisions. One is that I am the creator, and the other is that I am the enjoyer. We know from Vidvat Ranjan and from Gita Bhushana that the two aspects of consciousness is Kartritva and Bhoktritva. One is to do things, one is to be the responsible agent, and the other is to experience. So the creator and the enjoyer here correspond to that. In any case, creation is not creation ex nihilo, creation out of nothing. Rather, it means to create particular configurations of matter without creating the ingredients of matter. Ingredients of matter is not created because by Krishna's will they are eternally there. They are never created. Ishvara, Jiva, Prakriti, Kala, they're all eternal. Okay. But actually the Supreme Lord is both the creator and the enjoyer, and the living entity being part and parcel of the Supreme Lord is neither the creator nor the enjoyer but a cooperator. Notice Prabhupada is introducing a very, very interesting concept called cooperator. But one might argue, Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Srila Baladev Vidyabhushana, they have said that both the Jiva and the Supreme Lord are Kartas and Bhoktas. How come Prabhupada is saying that the Jivas are neither the Kartas nor are they Bhoktas? There we should, if you go back to Gita Bhushana, you will notice that there Kartrutva refers not only to the sense of creating particular material configurations, but it refers to being a responsible agent. The Supreme Lord is a responsible agent. The living entity is also a responsible agent. Now, some of these responsible agents, they desire to create various configurations of matter in order to enjoy them. So, material consciousness is filled with these two attitudes, that I am meant to create various material configurations and I am meant to enjoy these various material configurations. I am doing these things and therefore I am meant to enjoy these things. It is simply his abhimana, his assumptions, his own misconceptions in fact. In reality, it is the Supreme Personality of Godhead who is doing this. We are not really enjoying, nor are we really creating. Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha. Ahankara vimudhatma kartahamiti manyate. So the jiva, the Baddha jivas are certainly not the creators of various configurations of matter. And certainly we don't enjoy, at least to the fullest extent, even though that is the attitude that is found within the living entities in the form conditioned living entities in the form of their material consciousness. So the living entity is not designed for this purposes, but by constitution he is a cooperator. This expression cooperator is very, very interesting. Prabhupada will now explain it, and then I'll come back to this point. He is the created and the enjoyed. For instance, a part of a machine cooperates with the whole machine. A part of the body cooperates with the whole body. The hands, legs, eyes, and so on are all parts of the body, but they are not actually the enjoyers. The stomach is the enjoyer. The legs move, the hands supply food, the teeth chew, and all parts of the body are engaged in satisfying the stomach, because the stomach is the principal factor that nourishes the body's organization. Therefore, everything is given to the stomach. One nourishes the tree by watering its root, and one nourishes the body by feeding the stomach. For if the body is to be kept in a healthy state, then the parts of the body must cooperate to feed the stomach. Similarly, the Supreme Lord is the enjoyer and the creator, and we as subordinate living beings are meant to cooperate to satisfy him. This cooperation will actually help us, just as food taken by the stomach will help all other parts of the body. If the fingers of the hand think that they should take the food themselves instead of giving it to the stomach, then they will be frustrated. This example we can easily recognize is coming from Srimad Bhagavatam. Yathataror moola nishechanena tripyanti tatskanda bhujopashakah. Directly this instance is given. This example is straight taken from that. Tathaiva sarvarhanam achyutejya. So when we worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead Achyuta, then all living entity, everything else is taken care of. The central figure of creation and of enjoyment is the Supreme Lord, and the living entities are cooperators. By cooperation, they enjoy. So this example of cooperation indicates that the living entity gets to share the happiness of the Supreme Lord. Of course, it should also be noted, we are junior partners. We are not the senior partner. There's only one senior partner, unless if you want to include the Supreme Lord's internal potencies, who are actually his own personal expansions. For philosophical purposes, it is simpler to refer to Krishna as the singular senior partner, and we are all his junior partners. But when we obey him, then we also experience his happiness. It is not that he is happy and we are unhappy when we obey him. Rather, he is happy and we share in his happiness. The relation is also like that of the master and the servant. If the master is fully satisfied, then the servant is satisfied. This should be understood in terms of a dharmic master and a dharmic servant. A master and servant who accept the authority of Vedic Dharma. For instance, we see in the Ramayana, you can also see in Mahabharata. You will find instances of master-servant relationships. Masters very much take care of their servants, and servants very much serve their masters. When the master is fully satisfied, then the servant is satisfied. This we actually notice. So this instance of master-servant is provided to make us understand that we are subordinate cooperators. We are not equal partners with the Supreme Lord. We are subordinate partners. Similarly, the Supreme Lord should be satisfied, although the tendency to become the creator and the tendency to enjoy the material world are there also in the living entities, because these tendencies are there in the Supreme Lord who has created the manifested cosmic world. We shall find therefore in this Bhagavad Gita that the complete whole is comprised of the Supreme Controller, the controlled living entities, the cosmic manifestation, eternal time, and karma or activities, and all of these are explained in this text. All of these taken completely form the complete whole, and the complete whole is called the Supreme Absolute Truth. The complete whole and the complete absolute truth are the complete personality of Godhead Sri Krishna. All manifestations are due to his different energies. He is the complete whole. So from this we understand that Krishna is the Supreme Controller, and the controlled living entities, the cosmic manifestation, eternal time, and karma. Karma literally refers to activities, but it denotes karmic reactions here, which are subtle entities. So they are potencies of the Supreme Controller. These four are potencies of the Supreme Controller. So therefore, all of them, because the Supreme Controller exists with his varied potencies, therefore he is one organic whole, one complete whole. It's just when we talk about a man who is walking by the road, we don't say the man is walking, his shoes are moving, his shirt is moving, his pants are moving. We don't say all this because he's wearing a shirt, pant, and he's put on his shoes. So altogether one unit. Similarly, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he possesses these potencies. Or when we say the sun moves from one direction to another, we don't say the sun is moving and the sunlight is also moving, because the sunlight is an energy of the sun. It coexists with the sun, even though there is only one sun. When we say the sun moves from east to west, it is understood that the sun moves and the sunlight also moves. Sunshine also moves, yes. You can say that. Because they are together a complete whole. Such is the case with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is also explained in the Gita that impersonal Brahman is also subordinate to the complete Supreme Person. Brahmano hi pratisthaham. Brahman is more explicitly explained in the Brahma Sutra to be like the rays of the sunshine. This appears to be a mistranscript. It appears that Prabhupada intended to say Brahman is more explicitly explained in the Brahma Samhita to be like the rays of the sunshine. Because explicitly the Brahma Sutra or the Vedanta Sutra does not say this. One can examine the different editions of the Vedanta Sutra with the explanation of Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan, even otherwise. It does not explicitly say that that there is an in fact the Vedanta Sutra does not even talk about the impersonal Brahman effulgence of Bhagavan at all. So it appears to be an editorial mistake of having literally set out Prabhupada's dictation as it is. Whereas we do know that the Brahma Samhita provides very concrete evidence of an impersonal Brahman being the effulgence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yasya Prabha Prabhavato Jagadandakoti. That evidence we find all over presented in Chaitanya Charitamrita in various places. Prabhupada quotes it. The impersonal Brahman is the shining rays of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Impersonal Brahman is incomplete realization of the Absolute Whole, and so also is the conception of Paramatma. Impersonal Brahman is the content of the realization of a person who is successfully engaging in the impersonalistic method of Jnana Yoga. Such a person, he perceives the Supreme Personality of Godhead very vaguely as the impersonal Brahman. Just as when we human beings, when we look at the sun, we see some disk and we see the rays of sunshine emanating from that disk. That is not what the demigods see. They see much more than, they don't just see the rays and the disk. They see a demigod named Surya, who is perceived as a disk. So they see more than what we see. So impersonal Brahman is the content of the realization of a person who is not eligible to perceive the internal spiritual varieties of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is discussed in hair-splitting detail in Bhagavad of Srila Jiva Goswami. Anybody who is interested can look through it. It is clarified in Chaitanya Charitamrita. In the 15th chapter, it shall be seen that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Purushottama, is above both impersonal Brahman and the partial realization of Paramatma. When you read the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita with the commentary of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, then you will find it very clearly explained that beyond Brahman is Paramatma and beyond Paramatma is Purushottama, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is called Satchidananda Vigraha. The Brahma Samhita begins in this way. Ishvara Paramah Krishna Satchidananda Vigraha Anadir Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam. Govinda, Krishna, is the cause of all causes. He is the primal cause and he is the very form of eternity, knowledge and bliss. Impersonal Brahman realization is the realization of a Sat, eternity feature. Paramatma realization is the realization of Satchit, eternal knowledge. But realization of the personality of Godhead Krishna is realization of all the transcendental features, Satchit and Ananda, eternity, knowledge and bliss in complete Vigraha form. People with less intelligence consider the Supreme Truth to be impersonal, but he is a transcendental person, and this is confirmed in all Vedic literatures. Nityo Nityanam Chetanas Chetananam. As we are all individual living beings and have our individuality, the Supreme Absolute Truth is also in the ultimate issue a person, and realization of the personality of Godhead is realization of all of the transcendental features in his complete form. The complete whole is not formless. If he is formless, or if he is less than any other thing, then he cannot be the complete whole. The complete whole must have everything within our experience and beyond our experience. Otherwise, it cannot be complete. The complete whole, personality of Godhead, has immense potencies. Parasya Shaktir Vividhaiva Shruyate. How Krishna is acting, that quotation is from Shvetashvatar Upanishad. How Krishna is acting in different potencies is also explained in Bhagavad Gita. This phenomenal world means the world that we perceive with our senses, with our material senses. Our material world in which we are placed is also complete in itself, because the 24 elements of which this material universe is a temporary manifestation according to the Sankhya philosophy are completely adjusted to produce complete resources which are necessary for the maintenance and subsistence of this universe. There is nothing extraneous, nor is there anything needed. This manifestation has its own time fixed by the energy of the Supreme Whole, and when its time is complete, these temporary manifestations will be annihilated by the complete arrangement of the complete. There is complete facility for the small complete units, namely the living entities, to realize the complete, and all sorts of incompleteness are experienced due to incomplete knowledge of the complete. So Bhagavad Gita contains complete knowledge of Vedic wisdom. This paragraph is a paraphrase of the invocation that we find in Ishopanishad. The living entities also have been accepted by Prabhupada as small complete units, because they're meant to realize that they are uh, complete in minute quantity when they become liberated in service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Bhagavad Gita contains a complete knowledge of Vedic wisdom. That means it has nothing extraneous, nor does it lack anything, as a summary of Vedic wisdom. All Vedic knowledge is infallible, and Hindus accept Vedic knowledge to be complete and infallible. For example, cow dung is the stool of an animal, and according to Smriti or Vedic injunction, if one touches the stool of an animal, he has to take a bath to purify himself. But in the Vedic scriptures, cow dung is considered to be a purifying agent. So note this. You have two different statements from the Vedic scriptures. One says that the cow dung is pure. One set of texts. Another set of texts says that the stool of an animal is impure. Now, cow is certainly an animal. So cow dung is the stool of an animal named cow. So how do we accept both of this? Is this not contradictory? No. The actual intended meaning of these texts is as follows. As a general principle, an animal's stool is impure. But as an exception, the stool of the animal named a cow is pure. So both statements are true. This is how it is meant to be accepted. This is called Utsarga Apavadan Nyaya. So in this way, this is just a sample to show how we have to accept all statements of Vedic knowledge as being infallible. Just that you need to understand the intended meaning correctly. They have a particular mode of communication. You have to learn the modes of communication employed by the Vedic scriptures. One might consider this to be contradictory, but it is accepted because it is Vedic injunction. So one might say that these two different sets of Vedic texts, they are contradictory, but both texts are accepted as being infallible because they are part of Vedic injunction. And indeed, by accepting this, one will not commit a mistake. And if you accept it, you will not commit a mistake. You just need to understand correctly how both of them are true. Subsequently, it has been proved by modern science that cow dung contains all antiseptic properties. So Vedic knowledge is complete because it is above all doubts and mistakes. And Bhagavad Gita is the essence of all Vedic knowledge. Vedic knowledge has to be understood correctly, and when you understand that, you will also understand that they are above all doubts and mistakes. They are not dubitable. They are indubitable. They are beyond doubts. Undoubtedly, the Veda is true, and there are no mistakes in the Vedas. Vedic knowledge is not a question of research. Our research work is imperfect because we are researching things with imperfect senses. We have to accept perfect knowledge which comes down as stated in Bhagavad Gita by the parampara, disciplic succession. We have to receive knowledge from the proper source in disciplic succession, beginning with the Supreme Spiritual Master, the Lord Himself, and handed down to a succession of spiritual masters. Arjuna, the student who took lessons from Lord Shri Krishna, accepts everything that he says without contradicting him. One is not allowed to accept one portion of Bhagavad Gita and not another. No. We must accept Bhagavad Gita without interpretation, without deletion, and without our own whimsical participation in the matter. This is the same point. we have to accept the Bhagavad Gita the way we accept the Vedas. Just as even apparently contradictory statements of the Vedas are accepted as true based on certain principles. For instance, this principle that one statement is a general statement and the other statement is an exception statement. Like that, there are various principles with which we understand Bhagavad Gita and the Vedic scriptures. But we have to accept both of them as being true. No, we must accept Bhagavad Gita without interpretation, without deletion, and without our own whimsical participation in the matter. The Gita should be taken as the most perfect presentation of Vedic knowledge. There are a number of people, the Mayavadi followers of Shankaracharya, they do not consider the Bhagavad Gita in this manner. They rather think that the Bhagavad Gita should be interpreted to fit into what they consider to be the teachings of the Upanishads. Whereas we understand actually even from Shankaracharya, what to speak of others, that the Upanishads are the cows and Bhagavad Gita is considered to be the milk derived from the cows of the Upanishads. So it is the essence of the Upanishads. From the essence we can understand the details. Vedic knowledge is received from transcendental sources and the first words were spoken by the Lord himself. The words spoken by the Lord are called apaurusheya, meaning that they are different from words spoken by a person of the mundane world who is infected with 4 defects. A mundaner, 1, is sure to commit mistakes, 2, is invariably illusion, 3, has the tendency to cheat others, and 4, is limited by imperfect senses. With these 4 imperfections, one cannot deliver perfect information of all-pervading knowledge. So a mundaner has these 4 defects. These 4 defects have been spelt out in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Brahma, Pramada, Vipralipsa and Karana Patava. Twice in the Chaitanya Charitamrita they appear. The Supreme Personality of Godhead does not possess these 4 imperfections. And one who possesses these 4 imperfections cannot deliver perfect information of all-pervading knowledge, of knowledge about everything. If he is presenting information from his realization, from his own thoughts, his own understanding, because his understanding, his realization, they are all contaminated by these 4 defects. Vedic knowledge is not imparted by such defective living entities. It was imparted unto the heart of Brahma, the first created living being. Tene Brahma Krida Ya Adi Kavaye. And Brahma in turn disseminated this knowledge to his sons and disciples as he originally received it from the Lord. This is also brought out in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. The Lord is Purnam, all perfect, and there is no possibility of his becoming subjected to the laws of material nature. One should therefore be intelligent enough to know that the Lord is the only proprietor of everything in the universe and that he is the original creator, the creator of Brahma. In the 11th chapter, the Lord is addressed as Prapitamaha because Brahma is addressed as Pitamaha, the grandfather, and he is the creator of the grandfather. So no one should claim to be the proprietor of anything. One should accept only things which are set aside for him by the Lord as his quota for his maintenance. And that is straight from the first text of Ishopanishad. Ishavasamitam sarvam yat kinchit jagatyam jagat. There are many examples given of how we are to utilize those things which are set aside for us by the Lord. This is also explained in Bhagavad Gita. Tena tyaktena bhunjita ma ghridah kasyasvit dhanam. In the beginning, Arjuna decided that he should not fight in the battle of Kurukshetra. This was his own decision. Arjuna told the Lord that it was not possible for him to enjoy the kingdom after killing his own kinsman. This decision was based on the body, because he was thinking that the body was himself, and that his bodily relations or expansions were his brothers, nephews, brothers-in-law, grandfathers, and so on. Therefore, he wanted to satisfy his bodily demands. Bhagavad Gita was spoken by the Lord just to change this view, and at the end, Arjuna decides to fight under the directions of the Lord when he says, Karishye vachanam tava, I shall act according to your word. So, when Ishopanishad says that we should utilize those things which have been set aside for us by the Supreme Lord, who is all pervasive, then that is demonstrated here in Bhagavad Gita. So in this way, Bhagavad Gita is the essence of the Upanishadic wisdom. In this world, men are not meant for quarreling like cats and dogs. Men must be intelligent to realize the importance of human life and refuse to act like ordinary animals. A human being should realize the aim of his life, and this direction is given in all Vedic literatures, and the essence is given in Bhagavad Gita. A human being should realize the aim of his life. So this is a direction, this is a directive, this is an instruction. This instruction has been given in all Vedic literatures, that a human being should realize the aim of his life. There are prescribed aims. It is not that I can manufacture my own aims or manufacture my own aim or aims. That is a prescribed goal for us. That goal is ultimately to attain love of Godhead. At the very least, we should get out of material existence in order to serve the Supreme Lord in the Supreme Lord's abode. But the highest achievement of that, the pinnacle of that, is actually attaining Premavat Parshadattva, to become a loving associate of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that is prescribed in the scriptures. Prescribed goals. Vedic literature is meant for human beings, not for animals. Animals can kill other living animals, and there is no question of sin on their part. But if a man kills an animal for the satisfaction of his uncontrolled taste, he must be responsible for breaking the laws of nature, meaning he will be held responsible for breaking the laws of nature. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is clearly explained that there are three kinds of activities according to the different modes of nature: the activities of goodness, of passion, and of ignorance. Similarly, there are three kinds of eatables also: eatables in goodness, passion, and ignorance. All of this is clearly described, and if we properly utilize the instructions of Bhagavad Gita, then our whole life will become purified, and ultimately we will be able to reach the destination which is beyond this material sky. Yad gatva nanivartante tadhama paramam mama. So, if we take advantage of the teachings of Bhagavad Gita properly, then we can purify our life. That means we should accept activities in the mode of goodness, eatables in the mode of goodness, and so on. This is the reason why Lord Krishna, he presents several different aspects of material nature in terms of the three modes. In chapter 14 we'll find, chapter 17 we find, in chapter 18 also we find. It is so that we can accept everything in the mode of goodness, so that we will experience the effect of goodness, which is liberation from material existence. And after being liberated from this material world, we can reach that destination which is beyond this material sky. That destination is called the Sanatana sky, the eternal spiritual sky. In this material world, we find that everything is temporary. It comes into being, stays for some time, produces some byproducts, dwindles, and then vanishes. That is the law of the material world, whether we use as an example this body or a fruit, or a piece of fruit, or anything. But beyond this temporary world, there is another world of which we have information. That world consists of another nature, which is Sanatana, eternal. Jiva is also described as Sanatana, eternal. And the Lord is also described as Sanatana in the 11th chapter. We have an intimate relationship with the Lord, and because we are all qualitatively one, the Sanatana Dham or sky, the Sanatana Supreme Personality, and the Sanatana living entities. The whole purpose of Bhagavad Gita is to revive our Sanatana occupation or Sanatana Dharma, which is the eternal occupation of the living entity. We are temporarily engaged in different activities, but all of these activities can be purified when we give up all these temporary activities and take up the activities which are prescribed by the Supreme Lord. So we have to give up all non-Sanatana activities in order to take up the Sanatana activity. In other words, that activity which is carried out in the abode of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that is Sanatana Dharma. What happens in the abode of the Supreme Personality of Godhead? It is nothing but devotional service unto Krishna in his various forms. He is being served by his devotees. So it is devotional service unto the Supreme Lord, that is Sanatana Dharma, ultimately. But the activities that we engage right now here, they are temporary activities. Temporary activities means I engage in some activity in this lifetime. In the next lifetime, I engage in a different type of activity. Totally different. That is what we refer to as temporary activities. Permanent activities are not like that. In the spiritual world, we engage in the activities of bhakti, Bhagavata Dharma, and it is always so. It is always so. The Supreme Lord and his transcendental abode are both Sanatana, as are the living entities, and the combined association of the Supreme Lord and the living entities in the Sanatana abode is the perfection of human life. The Lord is very kind to the living entities because they are his sons. Lord Krishna declares in Bhagavad Gita, Sarvayonishu aham bija pratah pitta. I am the father of all, meaning I am the father of all those who are born in various species of life. Even though they are born in various species of life, they are actually my children. Of course, there are all types of living entities according to their various karmas. But here the Lord claims that he is the father of all of them. Therefore, the Lord descends to reclaim all of these fallen conditioned souls, to call them back to the Sanatan eternal sky, so that the Sanatan living entities may regain their eternal Sanatan positions in eternal association with the Lord. The Lord comes himself in different incarnations, or he sends his confidential servants, or sons, or his associates, or acharyas to reclaim the conditioned souls. Therefore, Sanatana Dharma does not refer to any sectarian process of religion. It is the eternal function of the eternal living entities in relationship with the eternal Supreme Lord. Sanatana Dharma refers, as stated previously, to the eternal occupation of the living entity. Sripad Ramanujacharya has explained the word Sanatan as that which has neither beginning nor end. So when we speak of Sanatana Dharma, we must take it for granted on the authority of Sripad Ramanujacharya that it has neither beginning nor end. So Prabhupada clarifies the nature of Sanatana Dharma very nicely now. The English word religion is a little different from Sanatana Dharma. Religion conveys the idea of faith, and faith may change. One may have faith in a particular process, and he may change this faith and adopt another. But Sanatana Dharma refers to that activity which cannot be changed. For instance, liquidity cannot be taken from water, nor can heat be taken from fire. Similarly, the eternal function of the eternal living entity cannot be taken from the living entity. Sanatana Dharma is eternally integral with the living entity. When we speak of Sanatana Dharma, therefore, we must take it for granted on the authority of Sripad Ramanujacharya that it is neither beginning nor end. That which has neither end nor beginning must not be sectarian, for it cannot be limited by any boundaries. Those belonging to some sectarian faith will wrongly consider that Sanatana Dharma is also sectarian. But if we go deeply into the matter and consider it in the light of modern science, it is possible for us to see that Sanatana Dharma is the business of all the people of the world, nay, of all the living entities of the universe. There is one book which was published by the Bhaktivedanta Institute by Sadaputta Prabhu, a disciple of Prabhupada, whose secular name was Dr. Richard Thompson. He wrote his first book, Mechanistic and Non-Mechanistic Science, in which he describes the process of Bhakti Yoga in modern scientific language. And it is very rationally presented. And it has won the appreciation of two Nobel laureates also. Nobel laureates in science, what is it? So that reminds me of this sentence of Prabhupada. It is possible for us to see that Sanatana Dharma is the business of all the living entities of the universe by considering it in the light of modern science. Non-Sanatan religious faith may have some beginning in the annals of human history, but there is no beginning to the history of Sanatana Dharma because it remains eternally with the living entities. This actually takes some time to understand. The Vedic literature is actually focused on teaching about the eternal activities of the living entities. There are activities of the living entities in Tamoguna, Rajoguna, Satoguna, and activities in transcendence. So if I fall into Tamoguna, as described here in Bhagavad Gita, and also as clarified in Srimad Bhagavatam, I will engage in certain categories of activities which have already been well defined. Similarly, in Rajoguna, we engage in specific types of activities, both now as spelled out in Bhagavad Gita and as it has been spelled out in Srimad Bhagavatam. And after we obey Krishna's instructions as it is coming through the parampara, at a certain point we actually begin to understand that there is nothing really new under the sun. There is subservience to Krishna or there is aversion to Krishna. When you become averse to Krishna, then you can become averse to him in Satoguna, Rajoguna, Tamoguna. Each of them have their specific effects. And they will take you back to what you were previously engaged in. Let us say you were in Rajoguna before, and you engage in activities of Satoguna, and then you engage in activities which are spiritual, Sanatana Dharma. You experience the results of Satoguna, you experience the results of Sanatana Dharma, Bhagavata Dharma. And then let's say you go back to the activities of Rajoguna. Again, you will experience the same effects of Rajoguna that you had experienced previously when you were engaging in Rajoguna. It is the eternality of material phenomena that the scriptures talk about, and how we can attain freedom from the undesirables in material existence. That is one of the key topics of the scriptures. So when we examine the history of Sanatana Dharma, we find that Sanatana Dharma has always been carried out by appropriate living entities throughout history, and it will be in the future also. This is because Sanatana Dharma or Bhagavata Dharma is eternally part of the living entity's nature. That will become clear in this and the next paragraph. Insofar as the living entities are concerned, the authoritative Shastras state that the living entity has neither birth nor death. In the Gita, it is stated that the living entity is never born and he never dies. He is eternal and indestructible, and he continues to live after the destruction of his temporary material body. In reference to the concept of Sanatana Dharma, we must try to understand the concept of religion from the Sanskrit root meaning of the word. Dharma refers to that which is constantly existing with a particular object. We conclude that there is heat and light along with the fire. Without heat and light, there is no meaning to the word fire. Similarly, we must discover the essential part of the living being, that part which is his constant companion. That constant companion is his eternal quality, and that eternal quality is his eternal religion. When Sanatana Goswami asked Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu about the Swarupa of every living being, the Lord replied that the Swarupa or constitutional position of the living being is the rendering of service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This question and answer appears in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Ke ami, kene amare jare tapatroy. Who am I, and why do the threefold miseries of material existence oppress me, torture me, torment me? What Sanatana Goswami wants to know is, what is the Swarupa of every living being? Jiver Swarupa hoy Krishner Nitya Das. And then Lord Chaitanya, he replied that the living entity's Swarupa, constitutional position, is that he is an eternal servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. If we analyze this statement of Lord Chaitanya's, we can easily see that every living being is constantly engaged in rendering service to another living being. A living being serves other living beings in various capacities. By doing so, the living entity enjoys life. Service means to engage an activity that is pleasing to someone else. This is called service. But he derives some benefit from that, which is enjoyable to him. Therefore, Prabhupada says, a living being serves other living beings in various capacities. By doing so, the living entity enjoys life. One should not misunderstand that service is always miserable. In fact, we are interdependent as conditioned souls, and therefore, first of all, we cannot even avoid serving others. Secondly, the very fact that people do experience at least some happiness while at the same time never are they capable of avoiding a situation where they depend on others. So therefore, they do enjoy life despite them being dependent on others. Therefore, Prabhupada writes, by doing so, the living entity enjoys life. The lower animals serve human beings as servants serve their master. A serves B master, B serves C master, and C serves D master, and so on. Under these circumstances, we can see that one friend serves another friend. The mother serves the son, the wife serves the husband serves the wife, and so on. If we go on searching in the spirit, it will be seen that there is no exception in the society of living beings to the activity of service. The politician presents his manifesto for the public to convince them of his capacity for service. The voters therefore give the politician their valuable votes, thinking that he will render valuable service to society. The shopkeeper serves the customer. The artisan serves the capitalist. The capitalist serves the family, and the family serves the state in terms of the eternal capacity of the eternal living being. So the family serves the state. But all of this is actually happening because the eternal living being eternally is dependent on someone else, because he's constitutionally a servant. Constitutionally, we are dependent. We are not constitutionally independent. We are constitutionally dependent, which means we are irrevocably independent. We are invariably we are irrevocably dependent. We are invariably dependent. Under all circumstances, we are dependent. Dasabhuto harereva nanyasaiva kadachana. Under all circumstances, we are dependent on someone else. If you don't voluntarily depend on Krishna, then you will become dependent on someone else. And that has been very nicely pointed out by Prabhupada here. Here everybody is dependent on someone else, therefore they are serving. You are forced to serve when you are forced to be in a position of dependency. In this way, we can see that no living being is exempt from rendering service to other living beings, and therefore we can safely conclude that service is the constant companion of the living being, and that the rendering of service is the eternal religion of the living being. Is the eternal religion, meaning it is the eternal dharma of the living being, because in the Vedic scripture, religion is defined as dharma. Sanatana religion is Sanatana dharma. Yet man professes to belong to a particular type of faith with reference to a particular time and circumstance, and thus claims to be a Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, or an adherent of any other sect. Such designations are non-Sanatan dharma. A Hindu may change his faith to become a Muslim, or a Muslim may change his faith to become a Hindu, or a Christian may change his faith, and so on. But in all circumstances, the change of religious faith does not affect the eternal occupation of rendering service to others. The Hindu, Muslim, or Christian in all circumstances is servant of someone. Thus, to profess a particular type of faith is not to profess one's Sanatan dharma. The rendering of service is Sanatan dharma. Factually, we are related to the Supreme Lord in service. That means, factually, we are constitutionally dependent on the Supreme Lord Krishna. Therefore, we are meant to serve Krishna. The Supreme Lord is the supreme enjoyer, and we living entities are his servitors. What does this mean? That is stated in the next sentence. We are created for his enjoyment. And if we participate in that eternal enjoyment with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we become happy. We cannot become happy otherwise. But there are so many people in the material world who are happy. Why does Prabhupada say that we cannot become happy otherwise? Pradhanyata vyapadesha hi bhavanti. Labels are given according to what is predominant. In 10 lifetimes, consider a unit of 10 lifetimes, continuously 10 lifetimes, okay, continuous span of 10 lifetimes. In one life, I commit some sinful activities, but I'm very happy in that lifetime. Then for the next 9 lifetimes, I'll be placed in great distress in the lower species of life. So even if we take 10 lifetimes as a unit, you can clearly understand what happiness is, what unhappiness is. So predominantly, when you engage in sinful activities, what do you experience? Right now, okay, you may experience some delight, but you're going to experience so much of distress. So much of distress. Therefore, overall it is unhappiness. Overall it is unhappiness. The amount of happiness is not significant enough for the combination of happiness and unhappiness to be termed primarily constituting happiness. So therefore it is not accepted. It does not come up to the standard of happiness that is desirable. After all, happiness is something desirable, and unhappiness is something undesirable. Suppose we are told that they have opened a new restaurant. They give some very good food, but they have one condition, that after you eat that food, you have to allow yourself to be kicked by some bodybuilders for 1 hour. So you can eat your meal within half an hour, but for 1 hour you will be kicked. And we will not accept it. In fact, that is not considered happiness, because none of us want an undesirable experience. So therefore it is not accepted as happy. It is not possible to be happy independently, just as no one part of the body can be happy. without cooperating with the stomach. This is an allusion to the previous example that we already saw from Bhagavatam. It is not possible for the living entity to be happy without rendering transcendental loving service unto the Supreme Lord. There is more to this, but that will become clear when we study Srimad Bhagavatam. In the Bhagavad Gita, worship of different demigods or rendering service to them is not approved. It is stated in the 7th chapter, 20th verse. Kamaisyaiste ratagyana prapadyantenya devata tam tam niyamamasthaya prakritya niyata swaya. Those whose intelligence has been stolen by material desires surrender unto demigods and follow the particular rules and regulations of worship according to their own natures. Here it is plainly said that those who are directed by lust worship the demigods and not the Supreme Lord Krishna. Because kama is saiste ritagyana. Kama means lust. Material desires refer to kama or lusts, lusty desires. Lust, anger and greed are gateways to hell. So from Bhagavad Gita we understand that lust is something which is very dangerous, and it produces undesirable consequences. So when Lord Krishna, he says that those who are impelled by lust, demigod worshippers are those who are impelled by lust, then that itself indicates that these people are unintelligent. When we mention the name Krishna, we do not refer to any sectarian name. Krishna means the highest pleasure. And it is confirmed that the Supreme Lord is the reservoir or storehouse of all pleasure. We are all hankering after pleasure. Anandamayo Bhyasat. Vedanta Sutra 1.1.12. The living entities like the Lord are full of consciousness and they are after happiness. The Lord is perpetually happy. And if the living entities associate with the Lord, cooperate with Him and take part in His association, then they also become happy. A student of the Vedanta Sutra will immediately ask, why does Anandamayo Bhyasat come here? What is it meant to be a reference for? Because Anandamayaha refers to the Supreme Brahman. The Supreme Brahman in the Vedanta Sutra is a synonym of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Bhagavan. There's nothing impersonal about the Brahman. That is discussed in the Vedanta Sutra. Except if you want to say that this is simply a negation of material attributes. But that is fine. In that case, you can say it is that kind of description of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Anandamayaha means one who is full of bliss. So now, since the Supreme Lord is full of bliss, and since the living entities are qualitatively one with the Lord, therefore, it is not inappropriate to refer to the living entities as Anu Anandamayas, minute Anandamayas. Krishna is Purna Anandamaya, perfectly Anandamaya. We are incompletely Anandamaya. You can say that he is Vibhu Anandamaya. We are Anu Anandamaya. The Lord is perpetually happy. And if the living entities associate with the Lord, cooperate with Him and take part in His association, then they also become happy. There is not even the slightest tinge of unhappiness in Krishna. This is pointed out by all the Vaishnava Acharyas who have explained the Vedanta Sutra. So when we associate with Him, that we also become happy. रसो वै सः रसं ह्येवायं लब्ध्वा आनंदी भवति. He is happiness itself. He is rasa itself. When we attain him, then we become happy. When the jiva attains him, the supreme being, then he becomes happy. Stated in the Upanishad, very distinct and clear.